Good afternoon. Okay, so I grew up in a black church, so I need you guys to do a little bit better. So I'm gonna try that again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Awesome. So I am really, really excited to introduce this panel. I am a certified planner. I'm the national president of the American Planning Association, and very, very seldom do my two worlds get to collide, where I get to talk about housing solutions and homelessness and zoning. They don't often go well together. So I'm really excited to be able to bring up my panel today. I'm sure many of you in this room know the data, so I'm not going to go over it very much. But for those of you who have not picked up the study that was just released, and I think I saw Bob earlier, about the affordable housing shortage in Illinois, you really should pick it up, and it really sets the stage for why this conversation today is so important, and I'm excited to have all of you here to talk about. The rising cost of housing really has become a significant challenge in many parts of the world. Over the last year and a half, as president of APA, I've gotten to speak all throughout the world, and that's the number one thing that comes up. Making affordable housing solutions is imperative. And so here with my APA hat on, we just released our Housing Supply Accelerator, which was a partnership with the National League of Cities and APA to really look at what are the barriers to increasing housing supply at all tiers, but obviously on the affordable and permanent supportive housing end, even more desperately. So I'm really excited to have a conversation today with this great panel so we can talk about some of the solutions from a federal and local area. On this panel, we'll have a conversation with leaders from Chicago DPD and DOH about strategies that they're implementing and how tiny homes fit into that. And as a recovering affordable housing developer, I know very little affordable housing will get done without some kind of money from HUD. So we'll have HUD talk about some of the research and the strategy and financing options that they've been looking into. We'll start from the local lens, and then we'll switch to the federal lens. Dawveed, we haven't switched. This is obviously not Commissioner Boatwright.
Surprise.
But she made sure to send somebody who'd be able to represent just as well in her place, so Dawveed.
Thanks, Angela. So hello, everybody. Definitely, as said, I'm not Commissioner Boatwright. She wanted to be here, but had other commitments working around the city. But sent me I'm also from Chicago. Grew up here. I am a certified planner and a licensed architect. I spent about 14 years working at the architecture firm at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, doing urban design and planning work all over the country. And about 2 years ago, decided to come and work in my city at City Hall, and had the opportunity to work with then Commissioner Cox, and now a good friend, and now my Commissioner Boatwright. So really excited to be here, really excited to talk about housing solutions. I grew up on the South Side and South Shore and in Auburn Gresham, and I live in Woodlawn right now. So it's like you see it every day. You see the residue of sort of the legacy of policy. So how do we start to understand and build and strategize around that? So that's really what I'm about, and excited to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisette Castañeda. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Housing. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I've been doing housing work for like 20 years. Started really understanding housing issues through organizing and policy lens. I've done direct service. I am always in deep awe of those who do direct service for their entire lives. I burned out after like 6 years. But a lot of it was around housing issues, right? I couldn't look at another family and say, yep, you've done all the right things, you've done everything you need to do, and you still can't afford your apartment, you still can't afford to be in the neighborhood that you want to live in, you still don't get to make the choices that are best for you and your family. I most recently came from a small nonprofit affordable housing developer anchored in Humboldt Park. And then I ended up here at, or not physically here, I guess. I just carry city with me everywhere I go these days. But I ended up at the city really because I was a housing practitioner and because I really wanted to ensure that, again, like NECA emphasized, choice was at the forefront for all Chicagoans, all the way from 0% 100% AMI to, DOH really concentrates at 140% AMI at the top end, but really, beyond that, everyone deserves the ability and the right to make the best choices for themselves, and that's the work I'm here to do. So, thanks.
I'm Taylor Kiely. I'm a senior community planning and development representative in the Chicago HUD field office. Our field office, the office I'm with, is Office of Community Planning and Development, so I'm going to say CPD a lot, but that is HUD. I work with a lot of you folks in doling out some of the community development programs, such as CDBG, ESG, COC, all the acronyms. Prior to coming to HUD, I was actually out in the Bay Area working in consulting for communities and working through their governance for continuums of care. And before that, I was a direct service provider in Chicago. Shout out to Trilogy. And I really came to HUD to look to figure out how to work with grantees to translate the regulations in the government language to make it work for you. And that's what I'm hoping we can talk about today. Thanks.
All right, I'm Sam Young. I'm also with HUD, and I tried to learn one acronym a day. And I thought it would take a year. 14 years later, I'm still learning acronyms. So I apologize. We do speak in acronym. So I'm with EMAD, which is Economic Market Analysis Division. We're part of Policy Development and Research. So the FMRs come out of my office. So anytime you guys deal with AMI, FMRs, you can yell at me. That's what I'm in charge of. So I'm an economist. I started with HUD 14 years ago. I'm now the hub director. I oversee 26 states, 4 different regions. And so I will say right out front, I'm not as locally focused as many people here and many people on the panel, but I do see some really broad trends and national trends that may be relevant to this conversation.
Great, thank you. So Taylor, you kind of you set yourself up for the first question because you talked about you're the money person. So with that said, you can talk about kind of where HUD has paved the way for tiny homes and kind of what do you see HUD's role and how do you think HUD really can be supportive, particularly with the programs that you manage?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I'd like to share kind of my experience in this local office. From the Chicago field office, we serve jurisdictions and continuums of care across the state, but then also more of the funding opportunities that are coming out of our office as well that can support innovative ideas like tiny homes. So while the COVID pandemic was this terrible thing that happened to all of us, it really forced the federal government to start to think and act quickly. And in my opinion, brought all of our processes into the 21st century. It was really exciting, right? That exercise, despite terrible conditions, really brought about a lot of innovative ideas and also quicker processing. With that, the requirements of a lot of our funding haven't changed radically, but the way that we work with our grantees to troubleshoot and figure out what their needs are and to figure out how to make that happen within the bounds of the regulations has changed exponentially. One of those innovative expansions is the introduction of the Home ARP program. Many of you are probably aware of that. That goes directly to jurisdictions that are home recipients. And eligible activities for that include acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter, includes permanent housing development, supportive services, and tenant-based rental assistance. All can be happening within the same project at different parts of the development. So that was pretty exciting. And in recent years, and kind of what we heard from other communities, we've seen tiny home communities not only support the permanent supportive housing stock, but also the shelter availability. And the purpose of non-congregate shelter under the Home ARP program is to provide or increase private units or rooms for temporary shelter. And this could include the use of tiny homes. A few more recent higher-level HUD initiatives that also support this work. We've got the new manufactured home community loan product, which provides organizations with access to affordable FHA-insured financing for purchasing, revitalizing manufactured homes. And then complementary to that is the PRICE program. I'm not going to spell out that acronym, but it sounds much better as PRICE. Offers competitive grant opportunities for investments in affordable manufactured home communities. A lot of those resources are focused on non-tiny home opportunities, but the PRICE program offers a lot of technical assistance to think innovatively about what a manufactured community looks like. At the local level, I partner with the City of Chicago. That's in my portfolio, and I'm supporting their implementation of, again, all the funding acronyms, right? These funds are to serve low, moderate income populations of the City of Chicago. In the City of Chicago, all my grantees must gather and incorporate feedback from those with lived experience in order to fund specific projects. With that, it's really crucial to include the perspectives of those with lived experience. Not only because HUD requires it, but because they have skin in the game. He said earlier. Those with lived experience have the best understandings of the problems that exist and the solutions that can resolve them. So HUD's role here really is to just support innovative and thoughtful conversations and making homelessness brief, non-reoccurring, and creating housing stability for all. And that includes ensuring that folks of lived experience have many seats at the table. I've been in this role for about 4.5 years now, but before that, I had my own HUD rep to consult. And seeing it from both sides now has really encouraged me to tell my grantees to think creatively about structuring their programs within the bounds of the regulations. As my HUD rep and mentor used to say, the worst HUD can say is no. Just don't expend the funds yet. HUD looks to support and respects that communities and their folks with lived experience know what interventions are best for their own community. Don't be afraid to ask for creative ways to use funding, especially in relation to innovative ideas like tiny homes. As a funder, I'm really looking forward to the conversation ahead and in supporting those creative and thoughtful conversations. Thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. Commissioner Castañeda, as a former developer and now a policy person and all the good things you're doing at the city, if you can kind of talk about how are tiny homes being incorporated in your work and the city's strategy to address the affordable housing crisis?
Part of what I love about being in a room like this is I don't have to convince anyone here of the basics, right? Housing is a human right. Everyone deserves the ability to have choice in their housing and to make the best decisions for themselves and for their families. And in order to achieve that for every single resident of the city of Chicago, we have to look at all of the tools. We have to develop new tools, and we have to look at innovation. All right. There's lots of ways in which tiny homes are innovative, and there's lots of ways in which tiny homes is just another name for an SRO. Right, you know, when we talk about square footage and the space that we occupy. So really for us, it's acknowledging and Mayor Johnson leading the charge and knowing that, you know what, we have 120,000 unit shortage of affordable housing. That has been a long building crisis. This did not happen overnight. But we can take the opportunity now to look at all the possible solutions and to look at all the possible ways in which we can address this. Tiny homes, along with any number of other things, can be the way in which we address this. Earlier this week, my staff did a subject matter hearing on additional dwelling units. And that's the other thing that we're looking at that tiny homes can really piggyback off of and say, like, again, coach houses and these basement units have already been the way in which we have contributed some naturally occurring, some actually restricted affordable housing, but how do we add tiny homes into that spectrum? And so we're really excited by all of the possibilities that are out here.
Great, thank you. So this isn't fair for Dawveed because we know each other pretty well. So he hears my ranting on a lot of this long before he went to the city. So as both a planner and an architect, and you know how I feel a lot of the talking I'm doing around that, despite being a zoning commissioner, is around zoning reform. So what can be done from a zoning perspective and kind of cut the tape as we heard about that earlier. What are you guys doing at DPD around barriers to creating more housing?
So I think there's definitely a lot of work that's being done around, sort of how do we make the zoning ordinance more active, more friendly, more accessible to folks. And one of the things that we've been working on in-house is really developing clearer guidelines around the existing zoning ordinance. But I think one of the things that, we're also looking at is opportunities to, make really market-focused changes that make it easier to develop with the current zoning ordinance, or find opportunities for things like tiny homes. So for instance, currently, like, you can't actually do a tiny home in a single family zoning in Chicago right now. You can't meet the minimum lot area to actually make that work. You can do it in an RT, maybe able to kind of finagle it into an RM, but then you also run into issues with setbacks as well as the number of units that you can kind of fit onto a site. So one of the things that we've been working on is actually maybe tweaking the PD ordinance to allow for a trigger that is specific to tiny homes. Because right now, to have that happen, currently you need at least 20 units, and it needs to be on a site that's at least a half an acre to be a PD. So one of the things that we're looking at is how do we then, sort of make, I think, some really key changes that make those things more accessible, and then how that then fits into community. Because I think there is a contextual and a physical design part of it. People, if you think about tiny homes, because I don't think any of us would want to see these as sort of isolated one-off things that sort of fit to the side of neighborhood, that they're part of the continuum of spectrum of housing that fits in the community. 2 flats and townhouses and bungalows and, sort of workers' cottages and all of those things. So one of the things that will be part of it is how to make sure that though the scale and the form and the function of them really works well in neighborhoods. We're continuing to have conversations around that currently, but you have a department that is really committed to working with folks like all of you to get to solutions that make sense for real development. Because at the end of the day, we really need housing units to be built. As was mentioned, we have, I think we're currently actually a little bit under 10,000 lots. So when I got here, we had 10,000 lots. Now we don't, which is great. So we're going to keep bringing that down. But just to continue to work on that and build a structure and build policy that facilitates the movement around those lots is key.
I'm going to piggyback off on that with a pretty short question. Sam or Taylor, it could be either of you who answers this. And it's just, for the first time ever, I've heard a president use the word zoning, which I don't, in my number of years out of school, I don't think I've ever heard that before. But the administration has been talking about zoning reform a lot lately. And do you know if there are any federal incentives or grants for municipalities to update their zoning laws? Because it may not be as big of a thing for Chicago, but I know we have representatives from smaller jurisdictions here that don't have necessarily the capacity on staff to do it. And so the actual technicality of funding doing that becomes a challenge?
Yes. Part of the FY25 budget proposal, which has not been approved yet, Congress has to approve that, but they're proposing $10 billion to state and local grant program to support zoning reforms as a part of a larger package to just incentivize affordable housing. And then there's also the Housing Supply Action Plan, and that is hopefully to use a carrot instead of a stick to incentivize if a municipality reforms zoning and land use policies, they get higher scores in grant applications. And so that's a way to incentivize, like I said, incentivize that sort of thing. And then also within HUD, the Office of Technical Assistance,
Of course.
but the Office of Technical Assistance that used to be part of CPD has now been folded into PD&R, my shop. And so for people or municipalities or jurisdictions that are trying to build capacity or have questions, that's what the Office of Technical Assistance is for. So you reach out to our office and we try and help if we can. So that there's not dollars tied to that, but it's a capacity component. And then also within HUD, there is the Pathways to Removing Obstacles to Housing, PRO Housing. So another acronym, yay. But it's $85 million, and the grants will be up to $10 million each. And that is to improve housing strategies as well as zoning reform as a component of that. And the application process is, I believe it's open. I'm not real sure, but that's happening as well. And then locally, so I can tell you, we also look holistically at housing supply, not just tiny homes, but whether it's micro apartments, or we did one in Phoenix called Casitas that were basically just 8 joined tiny homes in a larger development. And then downtown, the 4 projects that were mentioned, 3 of them have already crossed my desk to be approved. They're getting FHA mortgage insurance, which is what's really nice about that. It takes a little longer to underwrite, but it's 40-year fixed non-recourse funding. And there's MIP reductions if you do green development. It's a really nice program to make the debt service costs of a project go forward.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to throw it back to you, Commissioner Castañeda, to talk about kind of how DOH is thinking about vacant lots and productive use funding, and kind of how tiny homes are fitting that and other strategies you've been thinking of?
I came here directly from a ward tour. Commissioner Boatwright and I have been doing a lot of these together, and we were in the 12th ward here in Chicago a little while ago. So that's parts of McKinley Park and Brighton Park. And because of that, because I've spent so much time doing this with Commissioner Boatwright, I've heard her talk a lot about DPD's use of land use plans and corridor plans, and how important it is to do broader, more holistic planning in every community area and in every ward. And so for us, it's making sure that we are part of that process and saying, okay, what is the thing that makes most sense here, right? And what are we hearing from the community? What are we hearing from the alderperson? What is the thing that is important to do here? And how do we do that? And how do we participate in that? And then is it a tiny home? Is it a large multifamily development? Is it SRO preservation? Is it other home ownership opportunities, right? How do we look at all of these things? And so for us, tiny homes, the possibility of tiny homes is, again, another tool in the toolbox of a larger holistic plan and a larger holistic vision for each of the community areas and for the city. One of the things that I knew coming into this job that has just been further entrenched for me is how every community is different. You know, every alderperson is unique, and every community that they represent is unique, and addressing the needs of those communities, again, takes a broad lens approach, and we want to make sure that things like tiny homes are part of that.
Thank you. So Dawveed, similarly, when we had our kind of check-in call before this, Commissioner Boatwright talked a lot, and I've heard us say this a million times, about how DPD can get out of the way and looking at processes. And you alluded to it earlier, but if you can talk a little bit about what the process for obtaining permits is and how you're looking at how increasing the ability of tiny homes to get through that can be a part of that, or what you guys have been doing.
Yeah, so I'll break this into two chunks. There's the, kind of zoning part of it, and then there's the building code part of it. So on the zoning side, I think one of the things that we're, I think trying to do is really, to Commissioner Castañeda's point, it's like to do more proactive planning so that we can then set the land use that then allows for the easiest pathway to predictable, sort of as of right development to happen. Like, we don't need to be in the way, having to review things, having to do spot zoning, having to do PDs, having to do all of these changes, and that's what slows down the process. We have implemented things in our own process around like design review and around internal processes to try and make sure that we're, kind of not the barrier, even if those things need to happen, even if it needs to be a plan development or other zoning measures, that we can kind of move through that as quickly as possible. We'll continue to, I think, work on that and identify things. And one of the things that's in the cut to tape really focuses around the idea of getting rid of, sort of zoning or parking minimums. And to be able to say, like, hey, the market can, sort of then dictate what is the need for parking in this type of development, and not allow it to be a driver of feasibility for development. Because as you know, it can be, sort of something that makes a project unfeasible or unable to actually even physically fit on the site. It's like, oh, we need too much parking, we can't actually get the units we need. So on the DPD side, that's a lot of the work that we're doing. On the building side, particularly the tiny homes, the permit process is the same as, sort of any permit. Which I think has its ups, as it means that the quality of the tiny homes, which is something that comes up a lot. People are often like, well, oh, this tiny home, oh, well, is it going to be like basically a trailer park? And it's like, well, no, this is actually a building that sits in the community, it has a foundation. It is basically a small house, like, essentially. So literally it still has to go through the same processes. It still has to go through its permit review on that end. It is eligible for two programs that Department of Buildings has, which is they have a prototype program, which allows for, sort of a developer to come in and with a, essentially a prototype. Hey, this is what we want to do. We want to do a couple of these. We may change the facade, but this is the, all the walls and, systems and everything line up. They kind of pre-approve that, and then it moves through that process faster, as well as their self-certification program, which they work with architects to self-certify. Those folks self-certify those projects, and they're able to move through the permit process faster. So those things are still accessible to tiny home developers as well.
Thank you. So Sam, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you the opportunity to nerd out with us a little bit on studies or research that the federal government's doing on the social economic impacts of tiny homes. And I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, but any examples you have throughout your national work?
Absolutely, yeah. But thank you for acknowledging nerds. Yeah. So, I always, whenever I tell people I'm an economist, they never quite know how to respond. And so I always describe it as I get paid to be professionally curious, and I feel like I have the best job in the world. And I just love it. So yes, very much a nerd. But so what's important for all of you, if you remember only one thing, all of our research is on huduser.gov. Go to that website. Search, you'll find anything you want. Anything that we publish is placed there. And policy development and research, the department I work for, the piece of it that is policy development, so we generally are asked to touch a policy before it's implemented, and then a big part of our work is program monitoring. So if we do the MTW or whatever is implemented, it's part of our role to, is it working? What are the spillovers? Are there ways to modify it to fix it? So we see lots of this stuff. And I did a quick scrape of HUD user, and the first study that came out was in 2011, specific to tiny homes. And we've been publishing all kinds of stuff, from case studies. I pulled up a few of them. There was one in Los Angeles, California, a tiny homes village. We've had examples, a case study in Alaska. We built tiny homes for homeless veterans in Sonoma County, California. And then we actually did a white paper on small home design as a component of sustainability. And so, and that's just a real quick first 2 pages of stuff that came up. So there's lots out there. And also, we do take requests. So if you guys want research on a specific thing, give us a call. If we can fit it into our workload, we're happy to do that.
I feel like those are going to be famous last words.
Yeah,
for
I
you.
know. Just remember the part about workload. Yeah.
And Taylor, I can't let you go because you both talked a lot about technical assistance, and as somebody who's utilized you specifically around technical assistance, if you can just really talk about that a little more so people really understand the vast resources that you guys provide and sometimes underutilize, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just got a survey from headquarters asking, have you ever been confused about what technical assistance is? And I think a lot of my colleagues reached out. So yeah, it's a big one. We have a lot of funding going towards technical assistance. You know, Sam mentioned a whole team that's now under your office. They support our funding programs as well. So, and then also your HUD rep does their own technical assistance. So what Angela is talking about is the technical assistance I provided to their grants. So we have a wealth of just capacity building information, support to walk alongside you. And it's not just HUD staff, it's contracted workers that I actually came from to HUD. So I know that it's great work. It's very exciting for us to work with communities, and we do it for almost everything. I don't know, Sam, if there's anything that you want to add that I missed.
Nope, you got it.
Okay.
Okay, I have one last question, then I'm going to come to you, so start thinking about some of your questions. And Dawveed, this is for you, and just I'm tapping into your architecture side as much as your planning side, and really, how do you see tiny homes fitting into the existing Chicago neighborhood landscape, and what do you think needs to be done really to get communities to buy in, and what are the design types of things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a key thing. I think they're definitely a key part of the landscape, and it really is going to be, working contextually, right? And understanding kind of how these can fit into, kind of the myriad of things that happen in Chicago neighborhoods. Maybe it doesn't make sense for a tiny home to be next to a 30-story tower, but, sort of next to a bungalow or infill housing in Inglewood or, kind of spaces that, we have just so much land. There's, tremendous opportunities to understand both on a single lot, opportunity, but also aggregate lots, and working together with Cook County Land Bank, because they also have properties, and oftentimes we're trying to find where we're overlapping or we're engaging and can work together to find opportunities. But I think the contextual thing is both physical and scale wise, but it's also materiality and understanding the context of the neighborhood. So if you're in a neighborhood that has sort of a lot more frame houses, if you're in a neighborhood that has a lot more brick, what are the things that really make that fit in, Instead of doing, a pitch roof next to a flat roof tiny home, maybe you have that same, sort of vernacular. So really understanding from those physical perspectives how you can actually fit it in. And I think those things will make folks more comfortable and understand, like, oh, this is actually just a little smaller house that's right next to mine. There's folks who live there who, want dignity and respect and have earned that and, are just part of the community as well. So I think that's one part of it. I think there does need to be strategy around, sort of especially the sites that are bigger than just a couple of lots, and understanding how we can design those both with, sustainability. So, understanding what are the ways to integrate green space, what are the ways to almost, sort of emulate, for instance, the courtyard typology that is, part of the Chicago vernacular with tiny homes. There may be ways to really start to really build its own typology that fits into the neighborhoods in a better way. I think once people really see that, understand it, I think it'll be just an accepted part of the city's landscape.
Thank you. Now I'll take a couple of questions, then we'll let the panel close us out with some final thoughts. I'll give you guys a little while to think about what that might be.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. So my question's a really simple one. How long? What's the timeline? When can we expect to see some tiny homes start to go up?
So it's always the basic questions, right? So from the perspective of the administration under Mayor Johnson's leadership, I think you all can expect some news in the coming months.
Hi, everyone. Ruben, Director of the Committee of Housing and Real Estate for Chairman Cisco Lopez. This is for Sam, maybe. At the federal level, what is HUD doing to explore social housing models, say like in Europe, that are pretty big in scale? And how can, how can we start socializing? As I know New York and other cities in the West Coast have smaller models, and I think we're looking into it in Chicago as well, one of the efforts of my boss. So maybe you can speak to some of the stuff that you are working with other countries, other nations.
That's a great question, and you asked the right person. So one of the divisions of PD&R is international, and I was, in fact, just working with my boss. The two of us were working with the State of Israel on talking about housing and how that, because in Israel the dirt is not owned, the state owns the dirt, and so they have to lease the land in order for development to happen. And so that we were trying to figure out how they could incentivize development. But more specifically to your question, we've worked with South Korea. In fact, we just had the minister from Mongolia into our office here about a month ago. So we are doing whatever we can to talk to whatever country will listen to us and see what we can do about best practices. Yeah.
One of the challenges with affordable housing is for people who have disabilities getting into that affordable housing. It might be there, but I hear from people, I still can't find it, even though there's more affordable housing that is accessible. So what are the approaches we can have, maybe as far as policy and design of these developments that would make more of this housing accessible, and making sure that people with disabilities know that it's available and have ways of getting into the housing that's made for them?
In terms of what is, in terms of knowing that something is available, we are literally in the midst of efforts right now with the mayor's office for people living with disabilities around ensuring that there is a connection between someone who needs the unit and the units. I think a lot of what we have found, of course, around development has been that connection isn't always there, right? So it is affordable, but perhaps the person residing there is not in need of the accessibility features that the apartment might have. And I think that we would want to continue down that path for tiny homes or for any of the things that we want to do. We have continued to sort of grow our conversation actually with MOPD around figuring out what the gap is and really setting our goals towards that gap. As I mentioned at the beginning, right, we know that Chicago is facing a 120,000 unit shortage of affordable housing. And so we want to be clear on knowing what is the number for people living with disabilities, and how do we ensure that we are targeting our efforts in that direction. And anything that comes through DOH would be part of that, and so certainly tiny homes would be a part of that.
So I was wondering for the group at HUD, if you could tell me best practices that you funded, especially in tiny homes, if you have a specific example. But if not, what are the best practices, and tell me how that was funded and obtained, the funding was obtained.
Go ahead.
Take a stab at it.
Okay.
I don't have much. It's a great question, right? I think that's the last couple months preparing for this panel was my job, right, to find that. It actually was really hard, and I had a lot of questions for the folks that traveled. Was interested to see if they had engaged their HUD CPD office to explore any of these things. As I mentioned, the home ARP program, it is doled out to home grantees like the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois. There are options. These are new programs that the cities and jurisdictions are trying to figure out, but that's why it's crucial to come to HUD, ask the question, let's figure it out together so we can align all of the cross-cutting requirements and remind you of certain things to keep in mind as you're going about implementing it. But I don't have any examples at this point from HUD's CPD office.
Okay. Well, I don't work with, I work with CPD. I don't work largely with their department. But there has been a lot of development already around the country. I haven't seen so much in Chicago. And the majority of it, speaking broadly, has been what I would call micro apartments. Dense urban development, Seattle, San Francisco, Dallas, Denver. We've done lots of those. And they've been very successful through our multifamily department. And they use that same funding that I talked about before, the 40-year fixed non-recourse. Like, it takes a little longer to underwrite, but it's very attractive from a finance standpoint. And we've done, I talked about the casitas that were in Phoenix. We've done something similar in Texas as well. And the fact that they're not all detached tiny homes, but they're like 8-unit. What we liked about those is they were scalable, and it had some shared costs, so it kept the construction costs very low because of the shared wall with the 8 units. And there was still, you could still have the direct access to the space, outdoor space. And I actually really liked what came through those casitas in Phoenix and in Texas. They didn't call them casitas, but same thing.
Hi, I have a question about zoning in the ADU pilot program. Forgive me if I am making some mistakes with it. It's my understanding that the pilot program, we were supposed to hear in March if that was going to be expanded, and I've been checking and I haven't heard anything about that. And then also, my understanding is the ADUs would be within an existing building, making a new unit, or on a site with an existing building, adding an accessory structure, which would be a new unit. Is there any thought of, for new development, allowing a coach house with a single-family residence being built as new construction?
We turned in our report, DPD and DOH turned in our report on the results of the pilot program at the end of May. It was due May 31st, I want to say, and we just had our subject matter hearing and City Council Zoning Committee on Tuesday. And what is being recommended is citywide expansion of ADUs. You know, there are obviously some zoning things to look at, but we are looking at ensuring that the vast majority of the city is able to do this. We are still looking at existing buildings, and again, building what we call conversion units, right, which is like that basement unit, or building coach houses on existing homes, but we're not done tweaking, and the legislation still will be debated in City Council. Other people will still have a chance to weigh in, and the administration is just committed to ensuring that we can figure out the citywide expansion portion of that. So we're working on it.
All right, we have last question.
Hi, I was just wondering, is there any plans or strategies around the 130 acres of vacant land that the Chicago Housing Authority currently owns? Wondering if that could be a site for tiny homes possibly, or
was that a
if there is any updates on what's going on with that.
Planted her, didn't you, Tracy?
Like, I can't speak for CHA on that. I would love to see development on, I went to IIT, so all that stuff down State Street, I'm like, needs to happen. So we're always, sort of up to continue to just find opportunities and work with them on those. And I know there is currently a study that they've started along the land on State Street with CHA. So hopefully, I think in the next, several years, we'll start to see movement on that. And some of the developments that are happening, like Legends South and that that's still, ongoing. I think they were awarded QAP or one of the
Yeah,
projects came.
Legends is moving through our process. Yep.
There's movement. It's not always at the pace we maybe want to see it, but it's.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Tony Williams. I'm a real estate broker. And I actually just want to thank everyone for being present and starting the movement and realizing the movement of this tiny home nation. And also understanding how, say, two questions. First question. Our former mayor, Lori Lightfoot, set aside, say, $3.5 million towards the tiny home initiative. Seeing the numbers that have been rolling around in terms of from the presentations from the previous panel on what it's cost them to get to where they are currently, where can this get us in terms of starting and walking through this movement as we begin to move forward? And also, are we able to tap into those funds in terms of building upon it to get to where we need to be and where we see that vision as we all come together, being various puzzle pieces to make this picture even broader?
So I'll say that the Johnson administration continues its commitment to researching innovative options, right? Tiny homes is one of them. And so I think, again, we're going to look at, this is a tool in the toolbox, and then there's the funding toolbox, and we're going to look at all of the tools in that as well to figure out what are the best ways to ensure that whatever we're able to make movement on, that we're tapping into that and that the city is putting in its resources. And we absolutely always welcome resources from HUD and from others in all of our efforts. And so we will be looking to work with partners to ensure that we can put everything possible towards this once we're ready to move on it.
I think one last thing I'll add to that is, as part of the $1.25 billion bond package, DPD set aside some funding for technical assistance. So it'll be a grant fund that people can apply for that are, you may have a project you're interested in, that's what the funding is for. It's really a lot of the resources in Chicago, I think Community Trust has a grant, but there's very few. So we're like, okay, let's set aside some funding to explore innovative, interesting projects and work with local developers and support that, sort of growth of folks in the community doing development in the community. So that's also another opportunity to grow that as well.
Great, and I know we started a little late, but I think we can probably make up some time here. But going back to the CHA one, and I'm not speaking for them at all, but one thing I will say as a former CHA employee, if there is vacant land, not necessarily part of the plan for transformation communities, but just scattered sites that you are familiar with that is vacant, reaching out to them and presenting a proposal always does work. Occasionally, they will put out a developer RFQ for requests for qualifications for pre-qualified development teams, and that allows those of you who are developers an opportunity to submit proposals to CHA on how to use land, and it's usually relatively flexible. They give you the flexibility to come up with what you want to present, so I would definitely reach out. It's public information what land the city or CHA owns, and as both the commissioner and Dawveed have been saying, is they're looking for innovation and strategies. So sometimes I think, and I'm putting on my former development hat, we look for them to present to us, and I think this is probably the first time in a while I've seen an open-ended request from us to present to them. So I would definitely jump on that opportunity, and I thank you both for really being open to that and just continuing to put that messaging out, and hopefully people are hearing that. So with that said, I give you each little moment to final words you want to say, things you want to leave us to noodle with, or suggestions, topics, whatever you want. Close us out, and we can start with We'll start on your end.
All right. Well, speaking personally, if HUD would give me their checkbook, I would definitely spend some money in my hometown. So I don't sit nearly high enough. But what I would definitely recommend is I am surrounded by smart people. Please ask us questions. We're a resource that I think is not as tapped as it could be. Nationally, here, everywhere. You know, there's 7,500 HUD employees whose our job is to serve this mission. So, you know, ask questions.
NECA earlier in her comments mentioned the work that was done at DOH by Ryan Billeteri. And one of the conversations I had with Ryan as we talked about tiny homes, she's like, you know, tiny homes can be for anyone. You can just want to ride your Pelotons together. And like, that could be what tiny homes are for. And honestly, that's the image that I've continued to keep in my head as I think about tiny homes, not for the Peloton of it, but just for the idea that tiny homes can serve a spectrum, right? It doesn't have to be just folks who are experiencing homelessness or folks who are, you know, in the lower AMIs. We can talk about home ownership. We can talk about LGBTQ plus youth and adults. Like, I'm so excited by the possibilities of tiny homes. And we really do look forward to working together with as many of you as possible as we continue to explore all these options.
Yeah, I'll definitely, you know, kind of back that up. I think, you know, we're definitely in it to, you know, collaborate and, you know, tiny homes are definitely a continued opportunity to, you know, really bring people back to Chicago and bring people to our neighborhoods and build those rooftops that then support the commercial corridors and support the small businesses that are in the city. So, you know, we're, you know, at DPD, we're always up to, you know, have those conversations, to be a resource, you know, to work on the zoning policy and to work on the, you know, sort of design guidelines and those things that can be helpful to moving the you know, kind of work forward overall. And, you know, even collaborating just with the, you know, tangible physical portions of it. I mean, there's so much, you know, that are, you know, elements of this that we didn't get into, you know, water service and utility. I mean, that's something that I heard in just like my research, just, you know, working with Ryan years ago, just from other places, that's a big issue around like, okay, how do you connect this up and how do you maybe not have a water service line for every single, you know, to our house because it's going to cost you $30,000 to put in those lines. Maybe it's, you know, thinking of it more like a, you know, horizontal 8-flat, you know, and those things, you know, kind of work together. So, you know, I think there's a lot of work that we're, you know, continuing to be there and are dedicated to work with you all on moving this forward and getting development in the city.
Echo everything that they just said, obviously. No, the worst HUD can say is no. Please come talk to us. We really are encouraging thoughtful, creative conversations. At least I know in my office, we have a lot of really smart people. If we can't find the answer, we will find someone that does. So please reach out to us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.